Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, everyone. American novelist Tom Robbins writes, "In times of widespread chaos and confusion, it has been the duty of more advanced human beings, artists, scientists, clowns, and philosophers to create order. In times such as ours, however, when there is too much order, too much management, too much programming and control, it becomes the duty of superior men and women to fling their favorite monkey wrenches into the machinery. To relieve the repression of the human spirit, they must sow doubt and disruption." For the last decade, more and more people have been talking about the power of disruption. It is ever present in business conversations, the world of education, and it has become a foil with which many have approached the traditional structures of Judaism. The disruptive environment has been seen as a major catalyst, and many of our conversations about the future of Judaism and the path that our community specifically should take have been looked at through this lens. This year, however, has brought us to a very different moment in time. For many of us, our lives have never been more disrupted. COVID and its consequences have uprooted things that have always been there and knocked down pillars that have held up much of our day-to-day lives. Today, disruption does not mean change and growth. It means destruction. Destruction of the rhythms of daily life. Destruction of our economy and healthcare system. Destruction of our schooling and learning environments. While certainly a catalyst for change in many positive ways, we are now also witness to the toll disruption can take on us and those we love. In the midst of all of this, I'd like to share that I've discovered something interesting. In speaking with our community, I have heard that people are longing for those anchors and moments of legacy that can help us navigate the currents of chaos around us. The places of comfort and refuge. They are the buoys that we use to find our way through the choppy waters. The need for these legacy moments has never been clearer. And in the midst of massive disruption, our souls are crying out for it. My friends, today we begin Rosh HaShanah differently from any before. And as we do so, I would like for us to think about both of these ideas in our lives: disruption and legacy. Because these high holy days are all about both. In the mid-90s, two authors, Clayton Christensen and Joseph Bauer, wrote a book called Disruptive Technologies Catching the Wave. And in the last decade, Christensen wrote another called The Innovator's Dilemma. Both works challenge businesses to make radical changes in their business model, to reinvent themselves, and to go beyond just improving technology. In other words, to be disruptive. And from this point on, the business world changed. It was always better to be the disruptor rather than the disrupted. The classic example of this story is the story of Blockbuster Video. Remember them? At one time, they were ubiquitous, found in every neighborhood. Many years ago, when Debbie and I took the kids to live in Israel for a month, we were concerned about how to keep two very young children entertained for that length of time. But not to worry, right there on the corner in Jerusalem, in all of its blue and gold glory, was Blockbuster Video. We all got to watch Disney films dubbed in Hebrew. Then, along came an upstart named Netflix. At first, Netflix's business model was to allow for customers to be able to receive DVDs at their home via mail, and thereby relieving the need to leave the house and go to the store. This in and of itself was quite disruptive and very innovative. It gave customers an entirely new way to receive the product. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. Next came video streaming, then unlimited movies for a single price. The entire business of renting movies had shifted. People no longer felt that they had the time or the desire to go to a brick and mortar store when everything could be delivered right there to their doorstep or to their computer. And soon, just about every other retail enterprise looking to survive saw the wisdom of this new model. But Netflix didn't stop there. Not only did they create a business model to deliver content in a new and better way, but it was not long until they began to shake the very foundations of the media industry by creating original content themselves. They reinvented themselves yet again, and now Netflix is an industry in and of itself. These changes have been in every industry, and the business of Jewish life is no exception. Rabbi Greg Harris writes, "Today is the greatest time ever to be Jewish." It may not always feel that way, but it really is. There are more Jews doing Jewish in more creative ways than ever before. Jewish culture and art are flourishing. The creation of Jewish books, plays, and movies are at an all-time high. More people are doing serious Jewish learning at day schools and on college campuses than ever happened even in the age of the Talmud. Calls for disruption of the old ways of Jewish life have been echoing for the last decade. With the invention of the micro-minions and value-focused groups, some have even claimed that the time of the synagogue, Federation, and JCC is done. Those buildings, they claim, will eventually be a memory that we're trying to explain to the next generation like rotary phones, cassette tapes, or Blockbuster video. Up to a point, I'm not only forced to agree, but I'm excited to agree with those proponents of radical change and disruption in Jewish life. You see, I have always believed and understood that Judaism has these ideas built into its very core. The history of Judaism is a history of radical innovation. At its very inception, the belief in one God was more radical than anything that came before. Monotheism turned the ancient world on its head from the moment that God said to Abraham, "Lech lecha," leave your home and everything you know for an unfamiliar land and a totally novel creed. Our liturgy is also a radical innovation. For as much as we struggle with it at times, with the static nature of our prayers and Hebrew language and sometimes archaic imagery, in reality, it has been a constantly changing thing. Almost 2,000 years ago, Judaism was in an existential crisis. The temple had been destroyed by the Romans, sacrifices could no longer be offered, and the primary way that we worship God was taken from us. In a stunning display of adaptability, the rabbis created Avodat Halev, a service of the heart, to replace what was and forever change the nature of Jewish worship and community. It did not end there, however. While much of the structure of the services that we use comes from those early years, the services we have before us have been an ever-evolving search for relevance and meaning in our lives. Many of you know of my love for the Talmud and its study. And this year I have finally achieved a long-standing goal of mine and joined the Daf Yomi study cycle that began January 5th. Each day, we study a new page of Talmud, and I look forward to finishing the entire Talmud with hundreds and thousands of others, June 7th, 2027. Now, one of the reasons that I so love Talmud is that I believe it is one of the most radically innovative pieces of Jewish thought and literature. And I'm not speaking necessarily about its teachings. Many of them had been around for hundreds of years. But the entire vision of the Mishnah and the Talmud, its worldview, was disruptive. I know of no other foundational religious literature that goes out of its way to promote a multitude of opinions. Not only that, but it maintains the minority opinion with the understanding that it has value, and it may even unseat the majority in the future. Even those rituals that seem to be the very pillars of Judaism, Shabbat home rituals, the Passover Seder, the celebration of the holidays, they are all innovations throughout our history to preserve our people in different and challenging times. In his book, The Jew and the Lotus, Roger Kamenetz shares a dialogue between rabbis and the Dalai Lama. In explaining to the Dalai Lama how it is that we survived exile, the rabbis share time and time again how the ingenuity of bringing Judaism into the home, into a portable and accessible tradition, has allowed for us to survive all of these years. I am proud to say that our tradition is one of the most radically innovative in history. And it is due in no small part to that we're still here. And yet that's only half the story. In many ways, what is even more impressive than the innovation and adaptation is the fact that the values which form our foundation are still there. That when we look at the Jews of today and those that lived 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, we still speak a common language and identify with a common heritage. It is that legacy that is so impressive in spite of the challenges and change. Certainly, Judaism has been seen as a religion dedicated to legacy. Webster's dictionary defines legacy as something transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past. Our tradition conveys that same idea, but in a little bit different words. Minhag avotenu biyadenu. The custom of our ancestors is in our hands. The classic example of this concept can be found in our Talmud, Tractate Beitza 4b. Outside of the land of Israel, the biblical holidays have only one day, outside of the land of Israel, the biblical holidays that have only one day of Chag are extended to 2 days, because we're not entirely sure when the new month was announced in the land of Israel. Today, we certainly know to the minute when the new month begins. So why do we still maintain a 2-day holiday? Actually, it's the same question that was asked in the Talmud. The rabbis of the Talmud said, and now that we know the determination of the first day of the new month, what's the reason that we observe 2 days of festival in the diaspora? Their answer? Be careful to observe the custom of your fathers that you received. In other words, tradition. I can hear Tevye singing it now. We do things a certain way because that is how our fathers and our mothers did it. Tradition not only ensures that what we have learned and improved on stays with us, so that we don't need to reinvent the wheel every generation, but it can communicate the values and ideals that link us to others around the world. There is no doubt in my mind that Judaism is still here today, not just because of our ability to adapt and change, but equally because we as a people value our traditions and customs that come from the generations before us. It is these two ideas together, change and legacy, that ultimately provide us the rich culture that we celebrate together today. Tradition alone, without its ability to respond to the needs of today, creates stagnation. Change, without something to anchor it, is wild and unmanageable. The key is to find the right recipe, and that brings us back to these High Holy Days. We come together on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur to find the critical balance of these ideas in our lives. On the one side, these days are all about change and disruption. Nothing is taken for granted. No corner of ourselves is supposed to be left unturned. And yet, the way we do that, the process of tshuva, of repentance that we undertake, is steeped in tradition so ancient that it's the cornerstone of how we relate to one another as Jews, and in some ways, how we define our relationship with God. Let's think for a moment about the shofar. I know that today, because of Shabbat, we didn't hear it, so we can keep this in mind until tomorrow. But the shofar is arguably one of the most identifiable symbols of the new year. Maimonides teaches us that the sound of the shofar is there to wake the slumberers. Its primary purpose is to upset the rhythms of our lives so that we can improve, in essence, to innovate ourselves. The shofar is the ultimate disruptor. And yet at the same time, it is one of the most ancient instruments in our culture. There are so many options that we could use to accomplish the goal of waking the slumberers. Why don't we use a trumpet or cymbals? Instead, we reach back to a sound that has been ever present in our history, leading us forward in biblical battles, warning us of danger, and prodding us to open ourselves up to change, disruption, and legacy together in one package. We need disruption to keep us moving forward and growing, and we need legacy to anchor us so we don't separate from our core values. It's interesting that in a Harvard Business Review article from December 2012, Clayton Christensen, along with Maxwell Wessel, wrote of determining a disruptor's strength by understanding what they called its extendable core, the aspect of its business model that allows the disruptor to maintain its performance advantage as it creeps up market in search of more and more customers. In other words, even the disruptor needs to understand what makes it what it is. I translate that into the values that make it tick. Once you realize that, then you can go out with confidence and change the world. Even the Talmud understood the need for both of these forces in our lives. In Masechet Horayot, there's a fascinating discussion about two rabbis with two very different worldviews. Rabbi Yosef was called Sinai. He was the mountain and represented the tradition and all of the precedents that came before. Rabbah was called Oker Harim, the uprooter of mountains. He was the disruptor. He was the one who always tried new ways to approach the law. In the end, both rabbis were critical in the development and continuity of Judaism. Our tradition embraces both equally as we face the challenges of the world around us. A few years ago, the CEO of the watch company Tag Heuer was speaking about the threat that people who are taking their calls on their watches will eventually be for iPhones. And he said that competitors' connected watches were also a threat to LVMH if it did nothing. And it's a threat to which they needed to respond. But then he argued that while the threat may be real, it's only a partial risk to the company. He said, The connected watch will eventually become obsolete. A Swiss-made watch is art. It's eternal. You see, the disruption will pass, and another one will take its place, and another one will take its place. But the core of who they are, that is their legacy. That is what remains. My friends, that is why I am a conservative Jew. For all of its challenges, since its inception, our movement has understood the need to find the delicate balance between disruption and legacy. Our founders and teachers recognized not only the need to address the issues of our time, but like the Swiss watch, the eternal art of our heritage. Only when we can bring both forward, then we will thrive. Even as we look to the ever-changing business world, we find that the most successful disruptors keep that core and recognize the core need of their customers. People will always want books to read. They will always need groceries and products to make their lives easier. Amazon has changed the delivery, but the people are still buying those core products. So much has changed in the world of entertainment since Netflix came on the scene. What has not changed was our need and desire for entertainment. In Judaism throughout the millennia, the points of legacy in our tradition are the pillars to which we return time and again. And even though they've been there, the delivery has changed. We will always need to connect with and worship God. But the sacrifices that the Torah speaks about are no longer here. We've changed the delivery to prayer. Temples became synagogues, oral law became written down, and now is studied on iPads in the cloud. And again, the delivery may have changed, but I am studying the very same Talmud on my iPad that was printed on those early presses and on the scrolls more than 1,500 years ago. When COVID hit, we at Beth had to make some radical and rapid changes. Our programs and services became virtual. We actively created new ways to reach out to all of you through phone calls, through deliveries of challah, through the high holiday kits. One of the seemingly minor changes that you may or may not have noticed was the tagline that we use for our e-blasts and newsletters. When you look at it, you'll see our delivery has changed, but the mission remains the same. This is our promise to you, not only for COVID, but for the years that are ahead. May this new year, first and foremost, bring us health and safety. May we also, both as individuals and as a community, continue to find the joyful balance of disrupting the status quo with innovations while maintaining a connection to our legacy. May we recognize the gifts that our heritage brings us and together find ever more exciting and engaging ways to be Jews. Shana Tova.